If you're a parent considering therapy for your child, you've probably had this exact thought. Is it really just talking? Like, how can chatting in a room for an hour a week actually treat something as heavy as severe anxiety, OCD, or depression? It just feels a bit soft, right?
Well, talk therapy sounds soft until you scan the brain before and after. Therapy is biology. We usually think of medication as the hard biological fix, and therapy as just the psychological stuff. But in today's explainer, we're diving into the hard neuroimaging data that completely shatters that divide.
Therapy is actually biology. Seeing the evidence, let's get right into it.
The brain's threat circuit, inside the anxious mind.
So when we look at fMRI scans where we track blood oxygen levels, we can literally map out what's called the prefrontal limbic circuit. Think of the amygdala like your brain's fire alarm. In an anxious brain, this alarm is hyperactive. It's screaming danger even when there's absolutely nothing to worry about. On the flip side, we have the prefrontal cortex. This is your logical, top-down control center. It's the manager of the brain. Its job is to look around and say, hey, relax. It's just a shadow, not a monster. Turn the alarm off. But with psychiatric disorders like anxiety or depression, that top-down regulation is weakened. The manager is basically asleep at the wheel and the alarm is just blaring.
Okay, so what happens when you introduce cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT? A massive 2022 cross-diagnostic meta-analysis by Yuan and colleagues looked at exactly this, and what they found is incredible. CBT measurably changes the brain across multiple disorders like anxiety, OCD, and depression. It literally acts as neurological physical therapy. It targets that specific prefrontal limbic circuit we just talked about, causing significant shifts in the prefrontal cortex and the precuneus, which are absolutely crucial areas for emotional regulation and how we process info about ourselves.
When you compare the brain before and after CBT, it's honestly a night and day transformation. Before treatment, you've got that hyperactive threat reactivity in the amygdala and practically zero top-down regulation. But after a structured course of CBT, the scans show the amygdala is dampened and normalized. The alarm is quiet, and that prefrontal control totally strengthened. The manager is back in the driver's seat, handling emotional regulation like a pro. The therapy didn't just give the patient a new perspective, it physically rewired their brain's threat response.
Scanning the developing brain, translating the science to youth. Now, to really grasp the pediatric research, we need to quickly define a super important term researchers use: neural markers. These are measurable characteristics in the brain, like how reactive a certain area is or how well different networks sync up, that help researchers predict and track how a patient responds to treatment. Basically, looking for these physical markers helps take the guesswork out of therapy for kids.
A really fascinating 2024 review by Diaz and colleagues shows us exactly what these neural markers look like in youth. First off, just like in adults, a child's amygdala reactivity actually tracks their progress during treatment. As their symptoms get better, the physical reactivity in that brain region drops. Plus, the connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala can actually predict how well they'll respond to CBT in the first place. And the way their salience and executive networks communicate, that forecasts their recovery too. So an anxious child's brain has these physical, measurable features that both track healing and forecast who will benefit most from therapy.
Emerging science in youth, the evidence pyramid.
Quick honesty note here, because in these explainers we always want to be totally transparent with the science. That adult meta-analytic evidence we covered earlier, that is robust, highly replicated, settled science. But the youth-specific causal imaging, meaning those before and after scans specifically in kids, that's a much smaller pool of data. It is incredibly promising, but it's still growing. We really do need to treat youth-specific neural claims as emerging science right now, not completely settled fact.
Keeping that context in mind, let's look at where this emerging science is actually heading. It all revolves around a concept called functional connectivity. Basically, this is a measure of how different brain regions communicate, interact, and sync up with each other over time. It's not just about what area lights up on a scan, but how well those different parts are actually talking to each other.
Which brings us to a really exciting 2024 preprint study by Zugman and colleagues. They're exploring how to use whole brain functional connectivity to predict CBT outcomes in anxious use. They use advanced models to see if the unique way a child's brain networks talk to each other can tell us, before therapy even starts, how well they're going to respond. Sure, the sample sizes in these types of studies are still a bit small and the models aren't perfect yet, but the potential?
It's a total game changer. We're moving toward a future where a brain scan could actually help personalize your child's anxiety treatment.
Trainable, not broken. The power of neuroplasticity.
The thing you have to remember is that the developing brain is highly plastic. It's flexible, adaptable, and constantly wiring itself based on new experiences. So when a kid does structured exposure-based CBT, they aren't just talking. They are actively recruiting and reshaping the literal neural circuits that generate their fear. CBT is the structured environment that leverages that amazing plasticity to build much healthier neural pathways.
And that brings us to the biggest takeaway of this entire explainer. A fearful brain isn't broken, it's trainable. And the training leaves a visible, measurable mark. I really want parents to hear this. If your child is dealing with severe anxiety, their brain is not permanently damaged. No way. It just learned a maladaptive pattern. And because it learned it, it can absolutely unlearn it through training. Therapy is the biological intervention that makes that training happen.
In fact, this scientific reality is the whole premise, the bet, if you will, behind new digital CBT-based tools, like the Fear Me Not app. The entire concept is built on this neurobiological truth. Because fears are learnable by the brain's circuitry, safety and regulation are entirely relearnable through consistent, structured training. Whether that happens in a therapist's office or is guided by an evidence-based app, the goal is exactly the same, giving the brain's threat circuit the physical therapy it needs.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to consider. If your child's brain can learn fear, isn't it incredibly empowering to know that it can visibly relearn safety? The next time you think about CBT, don't just think about talking. Think about biology. Think about building a stronger brain.